everyone. I'm Tiffany Eddy.
And I'm Tom Praisall.
And we'd like to welcome you to another episode of
Anything But Politics.
And we are so excited to not talk politics again today with our very latest guest, who an incredible woman.
Yeah, she really is. So she's in her third term in the New Hampshire Senate. She's a real leader. She is the current Senate Democrat leader and also serves on the Senate Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee and the Rules Committee. But we're lucky to be joined by Senator Rebecca Perkins Kwoka.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So it's such a pleasure. So I'm going to start easy because you and I were talking a little bit about this before, but we're both moms.
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit about your kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think any mom can do that. So I have 3 little girls. My girls are 5, 3, and 1. And, you know, we have a busy little calendar. A lot of people say to me, how do you do all of this?
Yeah.
You know, and I think as with anything, you kind of give, if you want anything done, give it to a busy person, right? And so I often talk about just all the kind of balance we have to do. But my kids, I think, are just, they enjoy it. We have a really interesting and busy life where they get to learn all about things that go on outside their house. So they, my oldest one is learning to read. She actually is working on Great Eggs and Ham. That's what she did with my wife the other night. And then my littlest one, I keep telling folks, has just started saying, yeah, which seems somewhat unremarkable, but you have to see her do it because it's really cute. I'll get home from, you know, a long day at the State House and I say, did you have a good day today? And she goes, yeah. And I'll say, do you want to have some dinner? And she goes, yeah. And then, you know, if she gets a little frustrated, I'll say, are you a little frustrated right now? She goes, yeah. So it's very cute. But they're just the apple of my eye. And I think when you get home, they just kind of recenter you on some of the things that really matter.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, kids do have that way of keeping us all honest and keeping us busy and sometimes trying us a little bit. Not that mine would ever do that, but those are great ages. People would say you're probably in the weeds right now, right?
People say that to me all the time, and it's the only thing I've ever known. You know, I've been in elected office for about 10 years, and in that time I've gotten engaged, married. I've had 3 babies, 2 of them since I've been in the Senate. And so we've always had this life full of all these different pieces that are in the mix. But you know, as I often say to people, my kids are little. They still think I'm the coolest, and they can't wait to hang out with me. So, I kind of think when you get home at the end of the day, it's just nice to have someone who's so happy to see you, be in a friendly space.
That's great. Well, you know, speaking of childhood, you are a lifelong Granite Stater, correct?
I am.
So tell us a little bit about growing up, where you grew up.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. So we grew up, I lived in Stratham. Well, initially we lived in Exeter because we actually had the Exeter Dairy Queen, for those who might remember that. It was, you know, sort of located right on the border between. And when my parents bought it in 1980, they actually built an apartment on top. So when I was born, my crib was in sort of the closet of the office at the Dairy Queen. And
sounds amazing.
I know it was an interesting little childhood. And we stayed there till I was 2. But you know, because my parents were small business owners, we were just around the store all the time. There's a lot of pictures of me like in a little play pool out back behind the restaurant, you know. But we, I think for that reason, also just met a lot of different kinds of people. You know, we often had employees back in those days, you know, who this was sort of their full-time job, and they were able to raise a family, you know, by working for us. We also had teenagers from different circumstances where, you know, maybe mom or dad wasn't around, and so they had to work with us to have money to eat or, you know, kind of provide for themselves. And so we worked really hard, you know, but I can run a drive-through and decorate an ice cream cake and, you know, sort of fix your hamburger just the way you like it. So those are, it was just a big part of growing up, and we had that all the way until I was done with college. So it was, you know, we were just kind of a small business family.
Do you ever tell your kids, like, well, you know, I grew up in an ice cream store?
Yes, I do. And people always ask me, like, when I'm on the radio, they'll sometimes say, where do you get ice cream? And I was like, well, you can't tell anyone I did this growing up, but we used to go to Lagos, you know. So, but yeah, we just, and, you know, in Stratham, I think it was a nice place we lived. we were like in a neighborhood, you know, it's sort of a circular neighborhood. There were kids there, and we were just outside all the time. And like Stratham was a lot less crowded then, so it was, I think, just a really idyllic little New Hampshire way to grow up.
Any favorite ice cream flavors?
I usually get coffee Oreo now, but
It's one of my faves.
I know I go all over the place. When I was pregnant, I liked strawberry, so who knows?
Yeah.
But it's so true about a small business, as a small business owner in your family, it's like all hands on deck. The whole family gets involved. I know my wife's family owns a pizza place.
Yep.
And hooks it, and it's was always on the phone. You know, hey, can you come down? Can you do this? I think they grew up there. The only difference is that she doesn't like pizza as much anymore. And I'm like, I married you because this is my favorite food.
Right.
So it's good to hear that you still like ice cream.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I know. We used to, I think, eat it every day. And my kids are carrying on the tradition of being ice cream lovers. So
I wonder, does that kind of background, like growing up being sort of that hands-on with the business, like you knew how to create burgers, flip the burgers, you knew how to make the ice cream cones. It was such a huge part of your life. How does that pull into you now as someone who's in the Senate?
yeah, it's a great question. And I think when you're a small business owner, you know that no one is coming to save you, you know? And so really everything kind of rested on us. And if you wanted something done, you just got it done. And everything was about sort of trying to find some kind of creative solution to a problem. You know, we didn't usually have enough money to have a plumber come in to fix a toilet or, you know, hire someone to clean the store. So it was just a lot of taking care of things yourself. And also, you know, I think it's an attention to detail that really is kind of part of running a small business. I can remember being in high school. You know, I went to Phillips Exeter for high school, so I would get out of class at around 6, and I would go over to the Dairy Queen to kind of close the store and, you know, sometimes do my homework in the dining room when it was slower. And, you know, I would, like, get up early, bring my brother to the bus, go to high school, go to work, get home, you know, maybe still have a little bit of homework to do. And Mom would go through the list of, like, all the stuff, you know, did you wash this dish? Did you flip the lettuce into a new pan? You know, did you close the hamburger bun bag? You know, did you wash this down with warm water? And sure enough, you know, when she'd go in the next morning, I'd hear about, like, the one thing.
Yeah, it's always the one thing.
Yeah. So, you know, I appreciate that about just sort of knowing that it's, you know, it's all these little details that kind of add up to a big picture. And, like, lastly, I'd say work ethic. You know, I mean, we worked really hard. And that's part of what we need to do now to kind of make sure we're getting all the results we need in the work we do, but also just to kind of honor all the commitments I've signed up for, you know. Like, I'm a senator, I'm a mom, I'm an employee still. I still work as a lawyer. And I think my mom taught me from an early age, you know, if you want something, like, you just got to work really hard and make it work, so.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it's interesting. I didn't know you went to Phillips Exeter, but your education, your pedigree education-wise, I mean, it's really impressive. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about where you went and what led you in that direction?
Yeah, well, it was my folks. I think they grew up, they graduated from college. My mom was the first one to go to college in her family, and they graduated in the early 70s, you know, sort of into that recession, and I think really wanted there to be opportunity for their kids. And my brother and I are the first ones in our family to go to any kind of graduate school or anything like that. But when I was younger, my parents attributed it to the simple fact that I was young. I was too young to go to local first grade. So they basically went and found a spot where, you know, they would take me at 5 3/4 or something to go to first grade. So I went to Berwick Academy. From there, I went to Phillips Exeter. I went to Dartmouth for undergrad and Cornell Law for law school, which, you know, is in retrospect kind of amazing even to me. But it's definitely a story of sort of these institutions seeing something I maybe didn't really understand yet. And we've had a lot of financial help through scholarships and other stuff to make that happen. But I think it just really inspires me to kind of think about, we all start on different starting lines, you know, but America really is an amazing place where, you know, you can go from sort of living up top of a Dairy Queen to to be involved in big decisions that are happening in your state and kind of making a difference. So I feel really lucky to have gone to the places I've gone, but I don't know that I would have recognized that I was capable of all those things along the way. You know, I think that I had a lot of really good mentors that kind of pushed me in the right direction.
But yeah, I think it's also what you mentioned earlier, the attention to detail, right? That and the work ethic really helps you get into those places. So what was your major in undergrad? Did you always want to be an attorney or?
No, I was a government major, but I was all over the place. In high school, I was really interested in classics, so I studied a lot of like ancient Rome and Greece. And I think I've always been interested in government because I'm just kind of interested in community, and housing is interesting to me for the same reason. Sort of the way our physical spaces help create community. The whole idea that you can walk through downtown Portsmouth and kind of like run into people you know, which we do all the time. You know, our life is very like we throw our kids in the stroller, we head downtown in Portsmouth on a Friday night, and we run into people we know, and I feel lucky for that. I think there's a lot of folks that feel very kind of separated and isolated these days. And, you know, we have a really amazing sense of community in Portsmouth. So I've always been interested in sort of how do we get together as a group and kind of like resolve and move towards things. And it's why I've so enjoyed serving in the New Hampshire Senate. But I think it's also why I'm a lawyer, because to me, what I do every day is try to solve problems at my company, try to solve problems in terms of us moving our financial strategy forward or our business strategy forward. It's really a question of kind of like looking at all the information in front of you and thinking, okay, this is really complicated. How does it all weave together, and how can we kind of like bring it to a resolution, which I just think is fascinating work, so.
And what kind of law do you practice?
It's called kind of corporate and real estate. I've done a lot of different things, but I am general counsel of a small renewables company. So we build solar farms all over the country. We're in 8 state markets, so we look for like an open field. We lease the field, usually about 35 acres in size, and we take it, through the planning board and sort of get it connected to the grid, and then sort of figure out how to get it built. What is the financing piece, the tax credit financing and sort of debt financing that will allow it to get constructed and get humming.
And so right out of law school, so you went to Cornell,
Yep.
right? And then you graduated from Cornell. What was the first job right out of college? Did you come back to New Hampshire? Did you stay?
I went down to New York City. I did the big
Yeah.
law firm thing. So I went to Cornell, totally convinced I would go into public interest somehow, because I was just really interested in that. I had been in the Peace Corps and come home from the Peace Corps and served as a recruiter. And then even my first couple internships at law school, I had sort of worked in some roles that were public facing. But I really I did an internship at one of the private law firms, and it was addictive because of its complexity and, just kind of the numbers, the scale of numbers you were dealing with. I had worked in the Peace Corps in essentially microfinance, if you guys remember when that was sort of a big thing, was, just like groups of people financing each other to the tune of like $50, and now it was sort of this opportunity to work in these big New York City skyscrapers working on $1 billion deals,
Yeah.
So I felt like it was a really neat opportunity. The work was fascinating, but the hours were just like, all the movies. It was like you roll into your New York office at 9:30 or 10. You're just there, till 2 a.m, sometimes even later. So I did that for a year in New York and a year in D.C., and then I came back here. So.
And what was it? I want to go back a little bit, but the Peace Corps, we didn't ask you about that. So you graduate from, was this before you went to law school, or was this after law school?
Yeah, between college and law school, yep.
So what prompted that? I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was. And everybody should do the Peace Corps. I think it's a great retirement plan for people. But it's essentially this program where you go live with a family, somewhere else in the world, and you try to bring the knowledge you have to help them. And so I was a senior in college. There were all sorts of big political things happening, the war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan. And, I had been studying just this whole idea of sort of like, how do you take all these pieces and bring them together? And part of what I was interested in is just how economic development helps lift people to kind of empower themselves to take care of their own situation. And again, I think coming from the small business background, I did, I saw that there was just a lot of different kinds of opportunity even in America. So someone said to me sometime during my senior year of college, you would be a great Peace Corps volunteer. And I was like, what does that mean, So I applied, and I had taken some French when I was really little. And so they were like, we're going to send you to French-speaking West Africa
Wow.
to be a small business development volunteer, And I was 21 when I left. So it was just this complete mix of excitement for doing something new and adventurous and just, complete fear and nervousness. But the way the Peace Corps does it, they bring you over with a group of about 40 other people. So you go, we went to Philadelphia, we met sort of what they call your stage, and which is a French word, and then fly you over to Dakar. You spend 2 or 3 months kind of in their training facility together as a group, getting used to the country, learning the local languages. And then they do kind of an assignment ceremony where you all learn where in the country you're going to live, and then they send you off essentially on your own. They drop you off. I lived 9 hours from the capital in this place called Richard Toll. It was on the border of Mauritania, and with a family. And I just kind of had to, from there, figure out how I could help. It was awesome.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Because I'm like,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
it is fascinating.
Like,
My
really
mind's a little blown.
Yeah.
You took French as like a kid, and now you're like, here, you're 9 hours away from anybody else, and
Right.
good luck.
Right. Yeah, there's and I think some of this, people are a little bit familiar with the whole idea of like when military folks leave the country and come back, there's some patterns of similar just homesickness and sort of mental isolation as you learn a language in a place like this, because you really can't talk to anyone, fully. Your body is adjusting to all this sort of new germs and food, and so you spend a lot of time sick and unable to communicate really. And so that period lasts for a little while. And in my case, I was in a village where, to them it was a city, but it was a place where they primarily spoke a language called Wolof. So there were some French speakers, but as it turns out, a lot of the French speakers were sort of also those who are sophisticated at sort of the foreign aid game, or, having white visitors come. And so they weren't necessarily the people I ended up staying friends with long term. But, as you learn the local language, especially a language like that, that's not even a written language, right? It's just an oral language. And so you learn to speak it basically just like they do, And so this really kind of cool thing happens where over your course of your first year, you start to really feel integrated. And then it's like, the Wolof are really sarcastic people. And so they're a lot of fun because they're constantly joking around and poking fun at each other. But you didn't just have to learn the language. Like, you had to learn how to give and get, a little bit in the language. And so I think over that second year, you really can kind of fully start to integrate as you find the people you really can help, which in my case was a lot of students and young women that were roughly my age that were graduating from school and trying to figure out what they were going to do with their lives, kind of talking to them about the whole idea of business financing or a business plan, or how to calculate profit and loss, how to use the trade they learned at a trade school and turn it into a business, those kinds of things. And then literally working with illiterate women who did have businesses and knew how to make change or, converse enough to run their business. But, that was different than sort of understanding the business fundamentals of reinvesting or buying new equipment, or how to calculate what to do with a little bit of extra income. So it was a really fascinating time. I mean, I think you have to be, I know we use this term a lot, but very much a self-starter, because they do just kind of drop you off. And so you have to create your own role and your own schedule and your own work partners, and you have no grant money to do any of that with. So it's really just kind of figuring out what needs to be done and then doing it.
And getting it done. And is there goals that they set that you have to obtain, or is it just kind of you figure out what those goals are and work towards them?
Yes, it's very much the latter. And I think different people respond differently to different kind of metrics. Like, for example, in health, right? There were volunteers who didn't do business. They did more like a public health focus, and there would be different metrics and goals for them because they'd be placed in places that had a certain vaccination rate or a certain percentage of the population that knew to wash their hands or, you know, had sort of been trained in insect safety. But for roles like mine, it really, you know, I don't think anyone really knew what or where the work was. So to kind of apply metrics to it was difficult. But you know, we had kind of this simplified game of Monopoly we would play. So it essentially simulated 4 weeks, and you would make a decision each week with the money you had. You know, should you reinvest it in your business? Should you put it in the bank, or should you buy soda? And because like when you go to a wedding banquet, you have to buy soda, and when you go to a funeral, you have to buy soda. And so there were choices to make, and so you know, it was an iterative choice over the 4 weeks. And if you made the choice to reinvest in your business every time, you know, you would end up with the most money at the end. But we would play this game like, I mean, literally what you picture, you know, when you sort of think of a rural place in Africa, like we'd be in a compound, you know, there'd be a wall, there'd be dirt floor, you know, there'd be like 20 women, babies, chicken, like whatever, and we'd have the materials up on the wall, and you know, I'm just teaching, and there's a little bit of chaos, but they're paying attention, they're playing, and they would joke around with each other, you know, because again, they're like a very sarcastic people, and so, you know, if someone like bought too much soda and ran out of money or something, you know, they'd be like, whoa, just, you know, picking on each other. So there was this whole peer pressure element, you know, that I didn't really anticipate, but it was really cool. And some of the women and girls that were roughly my age, I mean, they were close friends of mine. You know, I would sit with them every night and kind of talk about America and all their different questions. So it was a really neat experience.
It sounds really amazing. Like, what was your I mean, these sound like really great experiences, but I guess what's going to stay with you forever? Like, what was there a really exciting trip you took while you were there with them, or?
I mean, what stays with me is really, I had a sister in my host family who, that was not her mom and dad. She was some kind of niece or cousin or something, and she had been given to the family when she was little. And she wasn't from there, and where she was from was more of a Catholic area. So that was kind of a distinction. We were in a Muslim area, and so she was kind of isolated, and she was about a year and a half older than I was. And I think just the difference in our lives, you know, was really striking, because it was, here I came from this other place, you know, I have my own, I mean, they were just fascinated by these things. Like, I had my own car, you know, I had my own bank account. I, you know, was planning to go back and rent an apartment, or, you know, buy another car if I needed to, get a job, you know, what did jobs pay you? Like, we would spend all this time, you know, kind of like, okay, well, if you're a waitress, what kind of American dollars would you make? And what does that mean in SEFA? You know, like converting it to their money. And they were super interested in all those kinds of conversations. But, you know, then it was like, she was my age, but at some point soon, she was probably going to get married. And she would go from essentially what was cooking all the family meals and doing all the laundry in this household to doing that in a different household and like having kids. And that was kind of going to be the big change in her life, you know, and there was just so much more that could be ahead for me, that I think that sticks with me a lot, because it was kind of a culture where, you know, like as women, you know, I wasn't out after dark most times. So we would just sit at home, and her room was across the hall from mine, and we would just chat, you know, and so it was hard to leave, because you kind of make a place for yourself in this village and in this community and in these people's lives, and then you leave.
And you are not in touch with them at all, or are you?
We have kept in touch. I mean, it's gotten easier, but it was really expensive for them to communicate with me right when I left, you know. But, you know, WhatsApp kind of allows you to send an occasional text message or something. But yeah, they'll just say like, "Hi, Becky, what's up?" You know, that kind of thing.
Sounds like my kids.
Yeah.
How was it? Now, I would imagine like living in a culture like that and then coming back to the United States.
Yeah.
That must have been a challenge too.
Right. Yeah, it was almost harder than going for a lot of the reasons they talk about, when sort of veterans return. But you do, you're just not used to living here again because you've been gone for 2.5 years. And it gives you an incredible appreciation for America and all of the ways that we have succeeded, the way that our rule of law holds, the fairness here, the way systems function, all the sort of public, like trash pickup and street cleaning and mosquito spraying and, like these very basic things that create a quality of life here that I think is really amazing. And also, it just makes the abundance really, really stark to you when you first come back. I mean, all those stories about, like, you go to a grocery store and there's 27 kinds of cereal. Those are very real, And I can remember the colors being one of the things that jumped out the most because they didn't have a lot of, like, Kraft macaroni and cheese, for example. And it's like you pour out that orange powder and it's like, wow, that's a really bright artificial color, But I think it also, when I got to come back, I ended up speaking at a bunch of things that were events for potential Peace Corps volunteers, which really helped because I came back to the seacoast in New Hampshire and, people are like, oh, what have you been up to? You're like, well, I just got home from 2.5 years in West Africa. And they're like,
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea what to ask you. So it was good to be able to talk to people who were potentially interested in the experience just to kind of even process it and sort of have a place to discuss that. But it's a little isolating again, so.
Wow, fascinating though.
Yeah.
An incredible story.
Yeah.
So then you go on to law school, correct? In
do.
New York City and then back to New Hampshire.
Yep.
What made you decide to start getting involved in public service?
I don't know the answer to this question fully, and I've been asked it a million times. I just have always sort of felt a sense of duty to this place. I've always felt like I had this incredible childhood growing up, like running around this little neighborhood, and my family was able to kind of improve their situation through this business, and I love New Hampshire. I think it's a very special place that retains a lot of incredible community. So I feel very invested in its success and sort of being able to keep it a place where my kids can have that same kind of incredible childhood. And I think they're on their way, I hope. But when I got involved in sort of this whole path that led to running for office, it was because people kept saying, the state is getting older, like we have this gray tsunami and the state's getting older and, we're going to die on the vine and everyone's getting older. And I like went away to college and came back and I went away to Peace Corps and came back and it just felt like people were still saying this, like the state's getting older and older and older. And I was like, are we going to do something or are we just going to talk about it, So maybe it was that small business attitude. I don't know. But I basically, when I was a second-year law student, I was like, I want to figure out what's going to impact this aging demographic, and quickly found my way to housing. And so as a second-year law student at Cornell, I was working with the Eastern Lakes Region Housing Coalition to do an audit of the 15 towns and their zoning ordinances in that region and advise on ways that they could be amended to create more affordable housing. So this was in 2008 or 9, sometime back then. And that's when I sort of started working with Ben Frost at New Hampshire Housing. And then, they passed the Workforce Housing Statute in 2010, which created kind of a regional obligation to have affordable housing. And so I worked with a group of folks, including Ben, to edit the municipal guidance to implement that law as like a third-year law student. And so then I got really interested in zoning and looking at all the different ways that worked, nationwide. And then when I moved back to New Hampshire, I was already kind of in touch with some of those folks. And so I got asked to be on the board of the Seacoast Workforce Housing Coalition. I got appointed to be a commissioner at the Portsmouth Housing Authority, and then from there got asked to run for city council since zoning was what I was working on.
And the planning board too, right?
I was in the
it's all
planning board.
integrated.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was as a member of city council, I was our representative to the planning board. And I think people have said run for the office that, there's a problem between you and it. And so city council passes zoning. I saw zoning as a real key to kind of keeping Portsmouth as vibrant as it is. So I ran on this single issue of affordable and workforce housing for city council. And we have this weird multi-candidate election, where the top vote getter is the mayor and the top 9 get on. And so I came in third out of a field of 16 on this issue, and asked the mayor to form a housing committee. At the second to last meeting of my first term as a city councilor, we passed comprehensive zoning changes across the entire city that allowed for residential development inside our single-story commercial plazas. So, like, where there's a Hannaford, you could build a couple stories of housing above it. And so I think by that time, I kind of felt like one person can make a difference. And, I really felt committed to sort of doing what I could to help steer our state where I think it should go.
Yeah, and I mean, in the seat that you serve in the Senate, I mean, it was held by Senator Martha Fuller Clark forever. I mean, she's a legend in the state Senate.
Yeah.
And I know you became pretty close with her probably during your time on the city council, and so, I think you've had big shoes to fill, but I think you're doing okay.
Well, thank you. They're huge shoes to fill. And my relationship with Martha it's like one of my favorites because she reminds me completely of my grandmother. They're both from that generation of just like, they want to talk about what's getting done quickly without a whole lot of muss and fuss. And we both really like land use and we both really like energy. So, we'll spend 2 hours just talking policy on her sun porch, So I feel really lucky to be trying to fill those shoes. Yeah.
So where along the way did you meet your wife?
Stereotypically.
Not West Africa, right?
No. So I met Caitlin when I moved back here, which I was working at Orin Reno down the street this way, I think. And I had played rugby in college. So I joined the local just like club women's rugby team. And that's where I met my wife.
I met my wife in a bowling league, so I mean.
She always jokes. She's like, you saw me in those gray sweatpants, and you were like, gotta have it.
And when did you get married?
We got married in 2016.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's a while now. And then 3 kids.
3 kids, yeah, which was complicated. We had to figure out how that worked. But yeah, we have 3, beautiful little girls. And I was always the one who wanted to have kids. But as soon as we had the first one, my wife was into it. So she's really good at like reading the internet on how we should talk about big feelings and telling me what to say.
That's important, though.
Yeah, I think it is important. And it's neat to watch them. They're sort of getting to a place where they really have a relationship with each other. And I think a lot of times being up in the Senate or watching adults try to resolve problems amongst themselves really makes you realize how important it is to teach that skill early. So we're proud of them so far. I mean, I've still got teenage years ahead of me, but
Well, it's interesting because I think my daughter in particular, when she was much younger, I was working at Channel 9 and would take her. The only way to spend time with her really was to take her with me a lot of times out on shoots. So she got exposed to so many different kinds of people and places because of that experience. And I think it really benefited her. You can throw her into any situation and she'll just be absolutely fine. So it sounds like you're able to give your kids something similar.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's good I always like these stories as a newer mom, than others but I tell this story from last fall because it was informative to me because, ever since my oldest one's been little, I had her when I was still a city councilor and she would come to meetings in her little car seat, and I would bring her up to put her on a conference table or something somewhere. And it felt like I was doing that forever. And as she got a little older, we started to hit a stage where we'd be at a meeting or something. She'd be like, Mom, this is so boring. Like, can we leave? And I was like, I was like, I think my time in public service is getting a little limited, But last fall when Kamala Harris came to visit Northampton, we got to go, to throwback and be kind of in the front row. And we had talked a little bit about the election, but when Kamala came through, she met my daughter, she gave her a high five, and she was like, "You gonna help your mom with this?" And Logan was like, "Yeah." And she was just, after that, she was like over the moon. Like she had spent the whole day being like, "Kamala, Kamala," And so it was like from that event on, she kind of was like, what's happening with Donald Trump, what's happening with Kamala Harris. And on the morning after the election, she cried a little bit. She was kind of invested in it. So it was just kind of interesting, like wherever you land on the political spectrum, to me, it was informative as a mom because I was like, okay, she's really starting to understand that there is this whole life outside of the home. And I think that's an important piece for me, is just for them to know, it's our home should be a safe little place, but also there's a lot of other people out there, and, we have to be a part of that too.
Right. And I think in this day and age, too, with social media and technology and whatnot, that to have them care about something beyond that and to kind of get vested is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on it. That's the dream.
No, I always do think it is fun to get, little kids engaged in politics. And I think it's probably just because it's my life and I want, to have a relationship. But there's so many ways you can do it that they don't even realize. On election night, I always have my nieces and nephews take a map of the United States, and whenever they call, the news calls a state, you get to color it in red or blue,
That's a good idea.
And learn about stuff like that subconsciously. You're tricking them, but but it is important because it's not something that a lot of people really get engaged in until later in life.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't, and I think about what you said. It's just like my daughter will have all these opportunities and know all these things that I didn't know when I was her age. So I think anything we can do to sort of set our girls up to just step right into life these days is important. And so it just it's added a layer to being a mom. I mean, COVID and you're holding public office and all this, but overall, I think it's been awesome. I really enjoyed it.
And I think you touched upon something, too, with your Kamala story. But in New Hampshire, we have just this incredible opportunity with the First in the Nation primary that we have access to so many fascinating people and future leaders. And so I can remember I've taken my kids to a whole bunch of different town halls. Sometimes they're begrudgingly, and you kind of pull them in. But I think they remember these and think, finally, like, wow, that was really cool. And we got to meet so-and-so. And so you do have this incredible opportunity with little kids who right now are captives and have to go with you.
You're right. Train them early. Yeah, and they have pictures, like my oldest daughter has 2 pictures with Joe Biden. It's like, what kid can say that? But it's actually a little special, too, because my wife's grandfather, so way back in Providence, worked for the Providence Journal for 40 years. And there's this picture of my mother-in-law, so my daughter's grandmother, and she's leaning over a rope to kind of give LBJ a kiss. And the way that it worked out with Logan and Kamala Harris, like the pose is almost identical in terms of the pose of like Kamala and Logan and just kind of how it all worked out. So we created kind of a side-by-side, which is just kind of a neat, it's like these parallels in history. So anyway, it's been an adventure, that's for sure, but I've really enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
Well, and I can say, you touched on it earlier when you were talking about your time at Dartmouth and how you got engaged in government and bringing people together to work on something and just solve a problem. And, I can attest to the fact I've seen you use that at the State House when you're in a committee and, things are really polarized in the world. But I've seen you work with folks to let's find a commonality here that we can agree on. So thank you. And the youth, bringing youth to the State House is always important.
Yes.
But given your youth, any future plans? I mean, you got the world is your oyster.
Thanks, Tom.
Anytime, Senator.
Such a charmer.
I know. Yes. I've answered this question a lot lately, but for now, I just got to where I am, and I think there's just a lot of potential to, as you said, kind of be able to be a bridge builder, from the role that I'm in. And I think having watched politics for as long as I have, even back to days at Dartmouth, it was different then. And even in the time I've held office, I think the way we campaign and the sort of expectation that you would be in person and that the voter is sort of entitled to understand your whole life, I think even that has changed, and so that's how we live. I think we try to just be members of the community. You'll see me at the grocery store buying milk, or like I said, walking around downtown Portsmouth. But I think that kind of campaigning is getting seeded in some ways to much more of a desktop operation. And so I really think there's a lot of potential in trying to play a role in making sure that we are out in the community, and that as elected officials, we're sort of present in people's everyday lives. And so I think being in the position I'm in, there's an opportunity to really look at how we do things and sort of what we're saying. And there's always opportunities for kind of political gotchas, but at the end of the day, I think getting things done for the people that depend on them is really, really important. Housing's been one of those issues, and I came up here and I was able to set up the Housing Champions program, which, I think is something that's been very bipartisan. But all that to say, I just see a lot of work to do from the role I'm in right now, and that's important to me. So I'm excited to have the opportunity. Obviously, I would have liked to arrive here under a little different circumstances as a Democrat, but I think, focused on this.
Fascinating. Well, we're honored that you came on our podcast.
I just have one last lightning round question.
Oh, cool.
Given you talk about going out in Portsmouth like every Friday night, I personally love surf.
Yeah.
But tell me, best restaurant in Portsmouth.
That's a tough one.
There's so many good ones.
There is, and I can't choose favorites because I'll get in trouble.
That's a good point. That was a terrible question to ask.
But yeah, we spend a lot of time in downtown. I have to put a little plug in because my friends just reopened River Run Bookstore as the Book Nook. So we've been spending a lot of time as our little group of friends, like stocking bookshelves. Yeah. I took care of the children's book section, so I know exactly how it's organized.
Did the kids help?
They did. They loved it. They tested out all the toys, stuff like that. But on date night, we like to maybe go to Massimo.
Okay.
My kids really like a mango roll from Domo. But the decks are open right now, so we tend to go down by the water, and have an ice cream at Animals.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's such a great community.
It is. We're lucky.
Well, and we're lucky. So thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure to get to know you.
You guys as well. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Awesome. Well,
and I guess that's it.
Do you want to wrap it up this one, or you?
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you for joining us on the latest episode of
Anything But Politics.
And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And again, thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you for having me.